And now we have a panel looking back to the transition 20s. So I'd like to invite the panelists to come up to the stage, and I'll introduce you. We're going to be using Mentimeter, so maybe we'll also put that on the screen as well, the Mentimeter, and we'll actually have a chance to speak with the panelists before we transition. There's the code for the Mentimeter. Welcome. So we have Harriet, Elena, and Beatrice, and they're going to actually talk with us about how we got to April 4th, 2060. What were some of the incredible socio-ecological transformations that took place? And we'll actually use the Mentimeter and the microphones in the audience to take your questions afterwards. Let me introduce all three of them, and then we'll hear from them each in turn. Professor Dr. Harriet Buckley holds joint appointments as a professor in the Department of Geography at Durham University in the United Kingdom and at the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development here at Utrecht University. And her research focuses on environmental governance and the politics of climate change, energy, and sustainable cities. And more recently, in 2057, she was the convener of the task force. It's a United Nations task force on nature for all. So that's Professor Dr. Harriet Buckley. Dr. Eileen Hutter is an assistant professor at Utrecht University in chemistry and at the Debbie Institute for Nanomaterials Science. And at her very ancient age now, I'd like to be so thrilled that she's here. She's just won a Lifetime Achievement Award in Artificial Intelligence and Solar Energy. So, you know, thank you so much for coming to speak with us about that over your long journey of your career. And Dr. Beatrice de Graaf, she's a distinguished professor at Utrecht Department of History and Art History. She has a specialty in security, counterterrorism, and international relations. And she's also, since 2053, the International Criminal Court of Justice advisor on space crimes. So we're really happy to have her here to speak with us about that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just take 5 minutes to help us think about the pathway that we've taken, the pathway from the transition 20s to today. I'll start with you. Over to you, Harriet. I think it's coming. Go ahead, try again. Not quite yet. And it's coming.
We're going to have to stay really close.
Exactly. No. Now you're on. Okay, we're good. Thanks,
I
Harriet.
saw that happen. All right, so thank you very much for inviting me to share the stage with you today. And it's a pleasure to reflect on how it is that we've got to a position now in society where not only do we value nature, but we work with and alongside it to improve our resilience to climate change and enhance people's well-being. Now, it's been a long journey, and I'm only going to be able to share a few of the turning points along the way. But as you know, it started here, right here in the Netherlands, and indeed, I think Utrecht was part of this movement. A turning point came when it was discovered that wild irises that were growing along some parts of the Dutch rivers were doing really, really well, given the nitrogen situation. And so what happened was that there was a purposeful program to rewild the rivers, and these wild irises became so valuable, along with the other kinds of wildlife that was planted in the rivers, that they became known as the purple gold. And farmers just gave up everything else and just concentrated on irises, flowers. It went into the Dutch horticultural industry, of course, but also massive discoveries in the Dutch biomedicine industry. And so it became like a new set of pharmaceuticals, and farmers had never really known it so good. So with the well-being of the farming community established, and these nature-based solutions that were being used on land and in rivers at the same time, of course, then we saw the Dutch water industry profiting hugely from rolling this out, this approach to nature-based solutions globally. So we had, you know, the Dutch were really then again a center of civilization for the world during the 20s. Sorry. All right. Okay. I'm getting there. I've only got 5 minutes. So as land and water started to be used for different reasons, then we had space to think about rewilding. Of course, the rewilding movement had started before, but more and more land got set aside for protected areas, and we saw increasing areas being used for all sorts of different kinds of nature protection. This was sponsored by the companies like Shell, like IKEA, who were keen, of course, to reach their net zero targets on the one hand, and the banking industry, recovering from the collapse of 2023-24, you all remember that, were able to kind of develop new financial products, debt for nature swaps, resilience bonds, and so on, which helped to develop nature-based solutions further. Now, these forms of managed transition that we saw in the 20s and into the early 30s were all very well, but we know that nature has a habit of doing its own thing. So as the use of nature-based solutions grew through the 2030s, it became clear that some more significant transformations were underway. It was a bit of a shame when not one but 3 of Scarlet Hood's grandmothers were attacked by wolves in the suburbs of Utrecht. But at least this drew attention to the lack of more edible nature across urban areas. And it showed, the research at the time showed that many cities, I mean, it's hard to believe now, but many cities had these nature deserts. People had talked about food deserts before, but we hadn't really thought about nature deserts in this way. With growing levels of heat and water stress and the kinds of civil unrest that this was creating, then, this became a real challenge. And, it seems that the wolves were right, that, pretty much there wasn't anything else worth eating but grandmothers in the suburbs. So the immediate solution was to encourage schools and communities to get like little herds of miniature goats. And that allowed you to rewild like meadows and parks and everything, and you had all these miniature goats grazing around, and they were, really nice snacks. But obviously, as the climate change zones changed, the wolves just moved up further north to Denmark, where the collapse of the pork industry had really created a lot of wild pigs. So we were pretty much safe by then. But this incident led to a much broader reflection. Nature was thriving, but society was not. The solutions proposed in the 20s and 30s to protect nature from people had led to a severing of society's relationship with its most fundamental need, nature. So with the 2040 targets for nature restoration and protection set by the UN goals achieved, largely due to the likes of Shell and IKEA, a more radical solution was needed to ensure that people could benefit. So this is when the great unlocking began. With a memory of the wolf raids of the 30s to the fore, Utrecht City led the way. On July the 14th, 2049, a mere 260 years after the storming of the Bastille in Paris, Utrecht threw open the doors of its botanic gardens and tore down the walls. And invited communities living in nature deserts to extract the nature they needed for their own parks, playgrounds, streets, and gardens to create a new form of urban nature that could be accessed by all. Other botanic gardens across the world quickly followed suit. What was the point of keeping all the nature that we needed behind those walls? And besides, genetic 3D printing and seed banks in every country now meant that rare species, and even those that had gone extinct, like the English rose, of course, that had withered during the heat waves of the 30s, could easily be replicated in a matter of minutes. Now, to be fair, printing a black rhino did take a bit more time, but that was really because of the security measures you had to put in place on the other side. So with the great unlocking, communities have chosen the kinds of nature that they want. It's not uncommon these days to see what we used to call native European plants alongside those that originate from Australia and Latin America. New climates and new times have called for new kinds of nature. We kept nature behind doors in a small number of botanic gardens around the world and in the protected areas that we'd established. We'd have never found out how important coral reefs have become in protecting the Dutch coast, or enabled so many people across the world to grow their own food and live within kind of communities with the kinds of nature that they want. Making the world sustainable in 2060s meant following a very old truth. If you love something, you have to set it free.
Elena.
Yeah, sorry, that was well over time. But
You cannot imagine how worried I used to be as a child. I grew up in The Hague, very close to the sea. We were seeing these global temperatures rising each year, and I was really afraid that The Hague would end up in the sea. What was also worrying me is that we, Western countries, were doing business as usual. Okay, there were some efforts, mainly by individuals, to move towards more sustainable energy sources, like solar panels. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture, but in the 20s we used to have these big, bulky modules on our rooftops. Some people did it because they felt it was ugly. But still, I would be running my dishwasher at night when I was generating no electricity. It was actually only after the big wildfires in Europe and the USA at the late 2020s that things really started to move. So then in 2030, a global tax on CO2 emission was introduced, and then the money that was earned was invested in science and technology. So for me, as a young scientist back then, those were really the days. I started to collaborate with social scientists, with architects, and through these collaborations we started to realize that we had to make our technologies more appealing, more attractive. And this is when we developed like flexible solar cells that could be integrated into rooftop tiles, walls of outdoor buildings, and windows. And we even developed the solar cells that now convert the energy from indoor light to electricity that we all place on our indoor walls. A major problem, however, at that time was the storage of electricity. And this is when we started to collaborate with computers. So we started by using the enormous battery capacity of electric vehicles, and by making sure that these electric vehicles were always connected to the grid, the renewable energy could temporarily be stored between production and use. It was also the collaboration with computers that helped us to match our energy consumption more with our production. And this is why your computer in your house now runs your dishwasher in the afternoon instead of the night. Another major problem, of course, in 2045 was the CO2 that we had already emitted in the air. And then we started to take inspiration from nature, because actually Mother Nature already invented 3 billion years ago how to convert CO2 into useful forms of energy using light. So this is known as photosynthesis in plants. So what we then did, again, collaborating with computers, with artificial intelligence, we started to predict what kind of materials could do the same job. So we started making human-made materials that now convert the CO2 from the air into fuels and building blocks for instance, plastics. We even figured out how to use these materials to clean our indoor air environment. So in 2055, Tivoli covered its entire ceilings with a material that uses the energy from indoor light to break down all the virus particles in here. Imagine if you would have been here in 2023. It may have been full of aerosols in here. So, altogether, the smart use of the enormous energy from sunlight and from indoor light to generate electricity, to perform chemical reactions, to convert the CO2 from the air into useful forms of energy and building blocks had at least saved The Hague from ending up below the sea. Thank you.
What do we see in the future? Darkness returned to the countryside and to the urbanized landscapes of the global West. Noises that were forgotten echoed through the metropoles. The stained greyish-white hue that had always been the inner city night sky cleared away. Smells, animal buzzing, humming, deep sensations, solid shades of black draped themselves across human civilization again. On the 1st of January 2028, when in a collective pre-dawn effort, power was cut to most of the big metropoles across the globe, panic broke out. Everywhere, observatories received phone calls from spooked residents panicking about the strange sky. What they were seeing were the stars. They came back, piggybacking on a series of tectonic shocks and development triggered by the hell year of 2027. The revolution of October 2027 was a global one, a devastated civil political order as our parents knew it. In contrast to the peaceful revolutions of 1989, the 2027 one inserted itself in a series of big ruptures and violent clashes of 1789, 1848 and 1917, both in terms of violence, elite removal and new constitutional orders. That year, droughts had disrupted food supplies, not just in the US, but also in greater Ukraine and in Europe. Storms, wildfires, hellish winter led to mass mobilization. the White House declared war on climate change and started experiments with climate-altering technologies. That triggered a Star Wars battle between the United States and China, illuminating the skies, the stratosphere, the cosmos, with giant orbiting lasers, later toting satellites to shoot the sky and win supremacy over changing the weather in their part of the world. But what really triggered a revolution was the insect apocalypse. That made itself felt in the disappearance of trillions of insects, the demise of millions of animals within 1 month. Plants and animals depend on the Earth's daily cycle of light and dark to govern life-sustaining behaviors such as reproduction, nourishment, sleep, and protection from predators. When the combination of droughts, wildfires, and especially the laser satellites increased the level of artificial light, this tipped the scale of the light and dark cycle that no one had expected. The insect apocalypse broke the balance. Insects pollinate crops and wild plants. They are the basis of our food chains. With the bugs gone, agriculture, the entire ecosystem collapsed. And that triggered a revolution. In the Netherlands, the merger party of the Green Union teamed up with the Farmers' Front. In other countries, the populists joined the animal parties, and they followed the textbook of the classic historical revolutions of yore. No transition, but a complete overthrow of the existing political regime, the universities, the big tech giants. The people took over. It was classic Tilly Huntington class interest-based revolt, because what all the elites had ignored was the ecological balance. Thus, on the 1st of January 2008, the new revolutionary government ushered in a new era of darkness, ending the light pollution, restoring biodiversity and the global ecosystems of day and night. They took back the night and our screens. Right in line with one of our big bio-prophets, Johan Eklof, had already predicted the Darkness Manifesto of 2020. Please look it up. The night revolution was a fact. When the news was announced on the radio was back again, they did so while citing old Eklof. The experience of looking up at the night sky is the experience of the sublime, to wonder and worship, and let our hearts be filled with wonder again. And across those vast skies, the surviving people were gazing up, pointing out the stars to their children again, and listening to the humming of the remaining winter gnats.
Thank you so much. What a vision of all the different transitions that took place since 2060, the great unlocking of nature and nature-based solutions. Elena bringing our imaginations towards the kind of energy revolutions and how they beautified our environments, the darkness, the revolutions, the insect apocalypse. So now it's over to you. We have some time for, actually we can bring the house lights up again to see if there's any microphone questions, and also Simone is going to help us with the Mentimeter again. So let's see if there's somebody also on the third row up there, if there's someone up there who would like to ask a question. Here on the second row, let's see if there's somebody up there. There's a question or a comment that I'd like to see here, and how about down here? All right, I'm coming back up to this, because now you've thought of something. I've got a comment. Yes, here, over here. So what do you think is a question from this transition 20s and the 2060 that we're in today? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm delighted that humans' unquenchable thirst for power at night has led to the sublimity of darkness. Will we continue to need energy to power our lives in the year 2070 as well?
Great, thank you. I think this is to you, Beatrice, in your vision of the next 10 years.
While being an expert on space crime in 2060s, I do think that we still will need some source of energy, but unfortunately, that really is not my kind of speciality to comment upon, and I will be very much closely controlled and monitored by universities watch over the integrity of our research. So my integrity of research is on security and crime, not on energy.
Great.
Yeah.
So Elena, because you're also focused on energy, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yes, so of course I think we all need energy to be alive, right? We need energy in our bodies to be able to move and speak and do whatever we want. So of course we need energy in the form of food. I think we still, like in 2023, we want to be together sometimes, so we need to travel somewhere. I mean, we can do that in the form of energy of walking somewhere, but if we have to walk or go far away, we may still want to use some form of energy, like to transport ourselves. So of course, I think the amount of energy that each person in the Netherlands was using in 2023 was a bit ridiculous, but we still use some sort of energy today. Yes.
Great, thanks. Let's go to Simone. Mentimeter questions. Go ahead.
Yes, we've got many again. Very practical question to all three. Imagine you could travel in time and reach a 2023 audience of more than 300 privileged people. Yes, imagine that.
Imagine that.
They all want to make an impact. What task do you give them that they can carry out immediately?
Great, over to you, Harriet. What task for a 2023 audience? Imagine going back 37 years. What would you task them?
I would ask them to look at where their pensions are invested. I would ask them not to think about doing something like turning off their lights, because I think that's pointless. I think I would ask them to make sure that they only do anything in a collective. And I think that where your finance is going, and I would also ask them to make sure that the university's finances are invested sensibly too.
Great. Go ahead, Beatrice.
Yes, I would urge people to take Johan Eklof seriously, the modern Cassandra of our day, because his Night Manifesto is really out there since 2 years, and no one has paid much attention to it.
Elena.
Yeah, so I agree also with the investments, and I think we want to make sure that other countries do not make the same stupid mistakes that we did. So I would be in favor of investing in countries with growing economies to make sure that they can go to a sustainable economy right away.
Great. All right, I'm looking again. If there's microphone, hands up here. Let's see. And then what about on the third floor? I'm definitely going to look for one question from the top floor. So get ready. There, I see you. Oh, can we bring the microphone over to this person here? Let's see where the microphone is. As we're getting it to you, we're going to...
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can ask a question,
Yeah.
Harriet.
I'm really curious about what happens to restaurants and discos. Are we allowed out at night, or does this now mean that we only have to work between like 9 and 12, and then we go to restaurants and discos like in the afternoon? And discos, of course, is a bit of a retro term. I'm sure that they're probably called spillators. Yeah, what is a disco? What is that funny thing? Yeah, what happens? Where do we go dancing?
I think that taking the night and day cycle more seriously means that there will be strict regulations on when to eat and when to go to sleep. And that there will be more hybrid forms of working and dining at the same place.
This sounds pretty boring, though.
It is. It is. At the same time, it cannot be helped.
It can't be helped. So I'm not. I mean, are there not like sort of black markets then emerging and kind of like?
No, it's not black markets. It's light. It's
light
markets.
markets.
Light markets. Yeah.
But now that we see the stars again, we can dance under the stars,
yeah,
right?
well, is this a bit like the rave culture of the 1990s coming back again? Sorry, really showing my age now.
No, but the darkness is a luxury. It's considered a luxury. So there are still places in the world in the 2060s where the darkness has not got hold, and those places are the deserts of the world.
Yeah, like Dubai.
Rather be bored and live in the desert. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're
Can
on.
you hear me?
Yes.
No, wonderful. My name is Ivo, and I had a question concerning futuring, because what we see here, we have a lot of visions for 2060, and I think a lot of us share the views, the visions, and essentially a ideal scenario. And just imagining we're in 2060, how would we go about when people just have a way different worldview than we do now, and that actually want to build back the world that we have now? How would we go about such movements? Imagine yourself living in 2060, and they want to go back to the extractive world, they want to go back to the capitalist neoliberal system that we have. How would you go about this?
Right.
To all of you.
Yeah, great. Who would like to respond to that? Do we see movements of kind of wanting to go back to the transition 20s?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't quite share the same view as other people on the stage this morning or here now, but I don't think that any of those things go away. I think we live with them uneasily, and we have other we're always going to live in a multiple worldviews. They're always going to be contested, and they're going to exist. So those parts of society maybe become less common, just maybe in the same way that you have more commonly now equality, gender equality, but you also still have societies where you don't have gender equality. So maybe we will have a kind of multiple and contesting side. So yeah, I think there will be lots of divisions and borders, and yeah, maybe bloodshed between, coming back to Lewis's point earlier. Yeah, those movements will be there, and we will have to work out how to politically manage and get along and move alongside with them, while the majority world is in the kind of approaches that we're talking about.
Beatrice.
Yes, what you're practically describing is a world that has undergone a transition. What I tried to point to, but that's very difficult to predict for the future, is not a world of transition. That's a world that went through a revolution. And that's something completely different, because during a revolution, remember the French Revolution, that was a paradigm in world history. It was unequaled. The revolution of 1917, the communist revolution, was in the Soviet Union, unparalleled. It ushered in a complete new world, and it broke down not just the elites, it killed so many people. There was so much violence as well. And it may happen like that as well. If there's enough class-based, interest-based revolt, it may happen. I cannot predict that, so that's really my struggle as an historian. I look back, I don't look forward, and I know that Johan Schott, he works on deep transitions, but there's practically only one element, the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution, that we can hark back to. That's not enough for sustainable experiment, but I would say that there's a high probability that the world will follow the revolutionary trajectory rather than the transitional trajectory. That can just be flipped and triggered by something completely stupid.
So what Beatrice is saying is basically what you're experiencing on stage is a multiverse of futuring of what we understand 2060 to be. Let's go to one more question from the Mentimeter.
Yeah, I have a question that ties in with Beatrice's comment just now. How do we decide what violence, because it is going to be violent, what is justified and what is harmful?
Well, a revolution puts that on its head. During the French Revolution, the guillotine was introduced as the perfect, sane, healthy, justified way. It was the Commission of Public Sanity that did away, public health if you like, that did away with the people that spoiled the new order. So exactly your question will be toppled in a revolution, and things will be put on their heads, like in the communist revolution as well. So the class system was completely revolted and put on its head again. So what does seem completely justified and legitimized for us now may be considered already violent, or the violence may become completely acceptable again, and the threshold of violence will be lowered. I mean, already in the rhetorics, we can witness something happening like that. There's more demonization, more dehumanization of people of the various extremes of the political spectra that we can witness now based on the socials. That's just rhetorics. It's not yet out there on the streets, but who knows how that will follow this trajectory.
So one final reflection from each of you, just something you think is key to keep in mind about this transition we've been through. Elena, do you want to start?
Revolution.
Revolution from Beatrice. Elena?
Policy.
Policy? How about you, Harriet?
Well, I think we actually need to get rid of the way in which we think about the world at the moment. I mean, I haven't had a question from any of the conservationists in the room asking me whether I don't actually believe that some kinds of nature are better than others, for example, which I'm imagining somebody might ask me over lunch. But yeah, we have very set categories of what we think is good and what we think is bad. And I think those are the categories which will need to change if we're going to be moving forwards. And those will be things that currently we think are good, like we think quiet is good, we think, you know, muesli is nice, or granola, or whatever it is. But we live in a particular kind of bubble, right? We've got particular sets of values, but they're not all shared. And we're going to need to loosen the values about what we think a good society is to make room for multiple forms of good society to emerge. And some of them may be revolutionary, some of them may not be.
Join me in thanking Harriet, Elena, and Beatrice. Thank you so much. Stay put, stay put.
Oh, yes. I'm moving.
There you go. I know, here we go. Thank you.